Welcome back, friends. You would have heard the good news that President Trump has backed down from the threat to bomb Iran. So far, you would have heard analysts in the West, particularly in the United States, who have argued that it is Israel that is dragging the United States into war against Iran. Now, that is an interesting argument, but at the same time, the same analysts contradict themselves by saying that actually Israel depends entirely on the United States. That if United States stops supplying money and weapons to Israel, there'll be peace overnight. So which is the case? Is it that Israel is controlling the United States, or is Israel a cat's paw, a forward post of US imperialism? Like all cases, it's important to understand the history. The United States, together with Britain, became interested in Iran in 1908, when there was no Israel. In 1908, a British investor discovered oil in Iran. But of course, it was known much earlier for the local people who found seepage of oil in the ground, and very often they used the seeping oil for fuel, for medicinal purposes, and so on. They had done that for centuries. What the British investor did was to discover oil in large quantities. That is to say, they began to drill the ground to extract the oil. Now, at that time, when the Anglo-Saxon world got interested in Iran, there was no Israel. In fact, it was almost 10 years later, in 1917, that Lord Balfour declared his famous statement creating, or not exactly creating, offering a piece of land in Palestine to the Jewish Zionists. Now, he did that for three reasons. One was that he wanted the support of the Jewish bankers led by the Rothschilds. They wanted these bankers to finance the First World War. Second, it was in Britain as well as many European countries, it was in their interest to funnel the Jewish people. As you know, at that time there was extreme anti-Semitism across Europe. Their intention was to funnel the Jews into a plot of land somewhere, and Palestine came under the British mandate, and the British found that there was a piece of land they could hand over to the Jewish Zionists. Third was, having handed the land over to the British Zionists, the intention was to compel or hope that the Jewish people would leave most parts of Europe and be concentrated in Israel. While this is going on, oil was also discovered in Iraq in 1928 and subsequently in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. So the region became critical for energy supplies for the industrializing Europe. So it became necessary to control that region. And that was another factor that led to the creation of Israel, because Britain, as well as the United States in the lead, they found it useful to have a forward post for Western imperialism in the West Asia. A forward post here meaning that they would have a, a Judeo-Christian state which is ideologically aligned to the West and at the same time hostile to the Arabs. Hostile to the Arabs because of the Zionist project of expansion into other parts of West Asia. In short, to convert or rather expand Israel into lands between the Euphrates and the Nile. And what does this creation of an outpost imply? It implies, first of all, that Israel is the tool of Western imperialism. And of course, as always, tools have their own needs and desires. So sometimes there is contradiction between Israel and the West. But by and large, they work together to achieve their separate but interlinked objectives. As this evolves over time, we have a situation where the Western powers are increasingly relying on Israel to control the oil-rich West Asia. The first, I would say the early example is the war on Egypt, where Israel helped United States and Britain to attack Egypt because the President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. So in 52, Israel was providing ground support, air support, and more air support than ground support, one should add, in order to attack Egypt, and the attack failed. Since 1952, Israel has continued to destabilize subsequent Arab countries, assassinate their leaders, and so on. And that has been done at the behest of the United States, in part, and it was also done because it was in Israel's interest in terms of its expansionist ambitions. Now, while this is going on, we have this constant tug of war in the West about who's controlling whom. And we have academics who write books about the Israel lobby, about how Israel is controlling politicians, bribing them, blackmailing them, and so on, which is not without any element of truth. They do some bribing and blackmailing, which is standard operating procedure in the so-called democracies of the West. But what is important to understand is that Israel, while carrying out the diktat of the West, is also demanding some protection from the West. So in the case of Iran, take a recent example, Israel has demanded that United States Air Force destroy the ballistic missiles capability in Iran because the missiles can reach Israel. And the US, as a protector of Israel, quite willingly attacked the missile bases in Iran. So what we see is what is normally called a symbiotic arrangement. And it is the inability to understand the symbiotic arrangement that makes analysts, especially in the West, to debate as to who is controlling whom. And the reason for this is not very far. You don't have to go very far to see the reason. Most Western analysts, and this includes fairly well-known personalities in what are called elite universities, most of them lack a grasp of imperialism as a category of analysis. What they are doing basically, but of course, to stand corrected, they do use the word imperialism on and off. But what they mean by imperialism is the tributary imperialism of the Roman variety. For them, imperialism is merely a way of collecting booty, of looting countries. They do not see imperialism as an economic system, as a global division of labor, an extraction of resources from the periphery, and then selling finished goods to the periphery. They do not see that economic rationale of imperialism. So they tend to examine this relationship between Israel and the United States in that context of imperialism as understood in the 19th century Europe. This is the period before Karl Marx. And in this confusion, they tend to, I would say, mislead many of the younger generation into thinking that what is really going on is bad foreign policy. By using the word foreign policy, they're reducing imperialist interest to the whims and fancies of individual rulers. So when they mention Trump's foreign policy or Bush's foreign policy and so on, what is implied is that somehow Bush or Trump and his coterie, just individuals who are getting together to push an agenda. As to why they're pushing the agenda, well, it's just their individual preferences. There is no understanding because they do not use the categories of imperialism and colonialism. There is no understanding that these individual politicians are actually acting out the interests of the ruling class who is behind them, who funds their election campaigns, who supports them through their administration by nominating individuals to take key positions. And you would see very often, they say the president brings in his own team, as if it's like a football team. President doesn't bring his own team. His team is nominated by the money bags who have put the president in power. And here I want to suggest an important point. These so-called advisors who are nominated by the money bags who are promoting the president, the job of these advisors is to promote the interests of the sectional groups that back them. And in this process, something I feel unfortunate that has happened to the United States, and which happens most of the time, but this time it's more obvious. The money bags who promote a president and his team do not promote him for the sake of democracy. The moneyed classes, the ruling class, which sits on top of billions of wealth, they don't leave the fate of their wealth in the hands of some president who is elected by the whim and fancy of voters, or because of a president who can come up with a more interesting slogan. No ruling class ever allows political leadership to come into power that can affect its own interests. So every ruling class is interested and actually actively works to bring into power politicians who will look after and protect their own interests. A good example for any of you like to see is the tax laws that Trump brought in his first administration and in his second administration. the massive tax breaks that he has given to the American ruling class. And that is the purpose, or I would say the main purpose, why the ruling class got him into office. The second reason I think he got him into office, and these examples go back to Bush and Reagan and Carter and so on, is that they don't want too intelligent a president to take power. That becomes difficult. He begins to ask questions. He begins to chart his own course. What they want is a pliable, not so intelligent man who can be twisted around, who can be perhaps, if necessary, blackmailed into doing what the ruling class wants, like the example I gave you, the laws that Trump introduced giving tax concessions to the rich. And this is the crisis that actually the American political system is facing, and the crisis that is affecting all of us in the rest of the world. That they bring into power individuals who have no capability of any serious kind to run the empire, but who must then toe the line that is dictated to them. One exception, and a very interesting exception, was President John F. Kennedy. When he was elected, again, he was backed by very powerful financial interests. It was assumed that he was part of the class and that he would act in the benefit of the class. But given Kennedy for what he was, he had some ambitions of charting a course of its own. It is said that one major challenge he posed to the ruling class, and here I mean the Federal Reserve, is that the Federal Reserve has the power to print money outside the control of the Congress. And Kennedy wanted that power to be returned to the Congress, that it's the elected representatives who should decide monetary policy, not a bunch of bankers, which is what the Federal Reserve is. Federal Reserve is a group of bankers, private bankers who decide monetary policy for the United States, and through it, they influence financial relations around the world. And Kennedy wanted this power to print money to be returned to Congress, so at least brought under its purview. And some say coincidentally, but I say not, Kennedy was assassinated, which that happened, I think, because he tried to be too independent from the financial interests that moved him into power. But of course, this is masked by the stories about how he was assassinated because he refused to support the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba. Well, that may have been a contributory factor, but what is important is that that alone could not have challenged or threatened the American ruling class, because that was very much an internal security issue in relation to the US Army. So where does this leave us? We are now facing a president in the United States who has been placed there with the help of the media and the propaganda, who has been placed there to carry out the interest and the diktat of the money bags, as I call them. This is reflected quite well in the Iran crisis. If one follows the flip-flops of President Trump, one day threatening Iran with total annihilation, and on the other day saying, well, actually we are having talks, so I will put off the annihilation. When at the same time Iran says, well, we have no talks at all at any time, and we don't intend to have any talks. What we are watching is really an incompetent president who's trying to find his way out of the mess that he was put in by his sponsors. In that sense, he has done a great service in his very uncomplicated way. As you may remember, he had mentioned with regard to Venezuela, with regard to Iran, that American intervention is almost all about oil resources and other resources of these countries. He is the first president who has done away with the nonsense about American intervention to promote democracy, freedom, and so on. And that some of the some of the podcasters found to be thrilling to hear him speaking so honestly about imperialism. But what it has also done is that it has told the American soldiers and sailors and airmen that they are fighting not for some lofty cause, which they many believed in. Now that those dreams have been shattered, those illusions have been removed by Trump, who said, "No, you are fighting and dying because we want to get rich." And this I think is beginning to have an effect on the rank and file. As you know, the aircraft carrier Gerald Ford, which was sent to West Asia, became incapacitated, so to speak, because it is said many of the soldiers, many of the sailors on board had stuffed the sewage system with clothes and blocked the drainage system. It is also said that aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln is returning to port because of an accidental fire in the laundry room. Well, they say it is accident, but it seems rather coincidental that the accident should happen at a time when the sailors themselves are disenchanted by Trump's confession that they have to fight and die to make the rich richer in the United States. What is important now for us to watch how this admission by President, how the removal of this dream, of this illusion that the rank and file in the army and the navy and the air force are fighting for a lofty cause. What would be the impact of the removal? Now, to me, the events in the two aircraft carriers indicates a tendency towards mutinous action. And this is something we should watch out for the next few weeks. As you know, already the head of the US counterinsurgency division has resigned and left in disgust, protesting that the war against Iran is a lie, that Iran is threatening the United States with nuclear weapons is a lie. Now, these are signs of internal dissension. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a mutiny, that's a much larger phenomenon, but mutinous tendencies are already beginning to surface. So let's sit back and watch how this evolves over the next few weeks. Thank you very much for being here with me, and please like and subscribe to this channel so that I can come back with more information, more analysis that you may enjoy. Thank you. Goodbye.